A farmer looking for water accidentally found an army guarding a dead emperor. In March of 1974, outside Xi'an, a group of farmers were digging a well during a drought. The wheat was dying. They needed water, not history. 2 meters down, the ground turned hard. Red earth, packed tight. Then one farmer's hoe struck something that was not a rock. He cleared the dirt away with his hands. A clay face looked back at him, life-sized, calm-eyed, mustached, and buried in the dark for more than 2,000 years. The farmers did not know it yet, but they had not found a well site. They had found an army. Thousands of soldiers, infantry, archers, kneeling crossbowmen, chariots, horses standing underground in battle formation, facing east, waiting for an attack that would never come. This was the funerary army of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. And here is the detail that should stop you cold. He did not just conquer the most powerful states in East Asia. He was so afraid of losing control that he tried to keep ruling after death, with an entire clay government following him into the afterlife. That is not the behavior of a man who feels safe. And here is the twist. He had every reason to be afraid. Because the empire he built, the first empire to unify writing, currency, law, roads, and administration across a huge part of what we now call China, collapsed in about 15 years. 15! Shorter than many car loans. The most powerful ruler East Asia had ever seen built something that did not outlive his own son. That should have been the end of the story. One unification, tried once, dead almost immediately, never to return. But it was not. Because what this paranoid, brutal, brilliant man started did not die with him. Over the next 3,000 years, the idea of unified China would be burned, split apart, conquered, shattered by civil war, humiliated by foreign gunboats, and declared finished again and again. And every time, it came back. Western Rome fell and never rebuilt the old Mediterranean Empire in the same way. Many ancient civilizations get one death. China has collapsed more times than most countries have existed, and somehow it keeps climbing out of the wreckage wearing the same old clothes. Do not picture the map as one solid, stable shape. Picture it like a cracked clay bowl. Broken, glued back together, broken again, expanded, repaired, chipped, and somehow still recognizable after every disaster. So the real question is not, how did China last 3,000 years? It is stranger than that. Why did China keep falling apart and never stay broken? The answer begins with one old human fear: chaos. In Chinese history, chaos was not abstract. Chaos was your village flooding overnight. Chaos was 3 different armies taking your grain in the same week. Chaos was a weak ruler, a corrupt official, an open frontier, and your family being the first thing history stepped on. So again and again, China's rulers came back to the same brutal lesson. Order is survival. But the tools built to create order armies, taxes, forced labor, surveillance, harsh law, kept becoming powerful enough to create disasters of their own. The solution saved the country. Then the solution became the problem. That is the whole ride. If you enjoy stories where a civilization keeps solving one catastrophe by quietly building a different catastrophe with better paperwork, subscribe, because China is about to spend 3,000 years trying to escape chaos without becoming the thing it fears. We will come back to that buried army at the end. For now, we have to go back before emperors, before China was one thing, before there was even a China to unify. Back to the first enemy this civilization had to organize against. It was not an army. It was water. Look at the Yellow River. For thousands of years, it did 2 opposite things at once. It built early Chinese civilization, and it periodically tried to destroy it. Its silt made the land fertile and fed villages. Then, every so often, it flooded with enough violence to erase everything it had helped create. That is why history remembers it as China's sorrow. Imagine being a farmer there 4,000 years ago. The river gives you food. The river gives you life. Then one season, your field is gone, your house is gone, your grain is gone. You are standing in floodwater, holding one very confused chicken, while an official arrives with the calm expression of a man whose own house is not underwater. Official, Good news! We are forming a flood control committee. Farmer, my house is underwater. Official, exactly. First item on the agenda. Surviving beside a dangerous river is not a job one strong person can do alone. You need coordinated labor, dikes, canals, granaries, calendars, and someone with enough authority to tell thousands of people, move this mud now, or we all starve later. Geography forced organization. Organization created rulers. Rulers created states. States created armies. And bigger states eventually asked the most dangerous question in politics. Who deserves to rule? Early Chinese kings, like the Shang, answered with ancestry, ritual, and divination. They heated animal bones until they cracked, then read those cracks as messages from the spirit world. King, will the harvest be good? Priest, the bone has spoken. King and priest, mostly crack. Then came the Zhou, who overthrew the Shang around the 11th century BCE and gave Chinese political thought one of its most powerful ideas, the mandate of heaven. Heaven gives a ruler the right to rule, but only as long as he rules well. If harvests are good, borders are safe, and people are fed, heaven supports him. But if famine spreads, floods spread, corruption spreads, and rebellion spreads, heaven withdraws its support. A dynasty does not just lose a war. It loses heaven itself. This idea explains everything after the fact. Every new ruler can say, the old dynasty failed. Heaven chose us. Every collapsing dynasty can be explained the same way. They became corrupt. Heaven left. The theory cannot really be disproven because every collapse just proves it again. Farmer, the crops failed. Official, weather is complicated. Farmer, the tax collector took my last grain. Official, economics is complicated. Farmer, maybe the king lost the mandate. Official, please stop being complicated. But the Zhou had a problem. They ruled through regional lords, not direct control. Over time, those lords built their own armies and treated loyalty as more of a suggestion. Eventually, China entered the warring states period 2 centuries of rival kingdoms, fighting, reforming, betraying, and trying not to disappear. This nightmare produced great philosophy. Confucius looked at the violence and basically asked, what if everyone behaved properly for 5 minutes? Confucianism imagined order through duty, ritual, family, and moral leadership. Taoist thinkers were suspicious of forced control and looked for harmony instead. Legalists looked at both and said, absolutely not. People need laws, rewards, and very specific punishments. One Western frontier state embraced legalism harder than anyone else. Qin, not poetic, not gentle, but terrifyingly efficient. Qin became a machine. Farmers produced grain, grain fed soldiers. Soldiers conquered land produced more farmers. And it worked. By 221 BCE, Qin defeated all 6 rival kingdoms. Its king became Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. For the first time, China stopped being a shared culture across rival states and became one empire. 7 competing worlds were forced into one political shape. He standardized writing, currency, weights, roads, and even cart axles because nothing says one empire like forcing everyone's wheels into the same ruts. But the most important standardization was writing. Chinese writing was not magic, and characters are more complicated than simple symbols of meaning. But shared written forms helped connect regions where spoken languages and dialects could drift far apart. People who might not understand each other's speech could still live inside a shared, written, administrative, and cultural world. The army conquered territory. The script helped that territory remember it belonged together. But Qin Shi Huang's machine also crushed people. Forced labor, harsh punishments, massive projects, roads, walls, palaces, and his own enormous tomb. Later tradition remembers him burning books and burying scholars alive, though historians still debate the details. Either way, Qin became the classic warning of what happens when the search for order turns into terror. Imagine a peasant dragged away to build a wall. He does not care that the cart axles are standardized now. He cares that his feet hurt, his family needs him, and the official with the whip keeps saying the same thing. Official, This is for unity. Peasant, will unity feed my children? Official, no, but it will look incredible on a map. Then Qin Shi Huang died in 210 BCE. His son inherited an empire built on fear and discovered the problem with fear-based systems. They only work while the person enforcing the fear is alive and terrifying. Rebellion spread almost immediately. By 207 BCE, the dynasty was gone. 15 years. That should have killed the idea of unified China forever. It did not, because Qin had proven something nobody could unprove. Unity was possible. And the Han dynasty learned the key lesson. Do not throw away the machine. Just make it less unbearable. The Han kept the centralized empire, bureaucracy, and writing, but wrapped them in Confucian moral language instead of pure terror, less fear, more ritual, more officials selected, at least in theory, by knowledge. Han rule lasted roughly 4 centuries. It became so foundational that the majority ethnic group in China still calls itself the Han people today. Unity stopped being an experiment. It became the normal shape of the world. And once unity feels normal, division starts to feel like disaster. But the bigger the empire gets, the bigger the collapse becomes when it fails. And the Han was already planting the seeds of its own. The Han did not collapse because one villain pressed a button labeled "End the Empire." It collapsed the way empires usually collapse. Slowly, then all at once. Court factions fought for influence. Powerful families hoarded land. Officials became corrupt. Frontier wars drained the treasury. Floods, disease, and taxes squeezed the people until the center no longer looked like protection. In 184 CE, peasants wrapped yellow cloth around their heads and rose up in the Yellow Turban Rebellion. One exhausted farmer stood between a tax collector, a sick child, and an empty field. Above him, the official message was simple. Everything is fine. Farmer, I would like to stop participating in this dynasty. History, excellent. Here is a rebellion. The Han weakened. Generals seized regional power. By 220 CE, the empire fractured into the 3 kingdoms Wei, Shu, and Wu, later turned into legend, strategy, and heroic drama. But underneath the legend was a brutal fact. Unity had failed. And when unity failed, ordinary people became fuel. A family hides its last grain under the floorboards. A soldier knocks, then another soldier knocks, then a third. Child, are these all the government? Father, today, yes. This is why the dream of unity kept returning. Not because unity was always gentle, because division was often worse. China spent centuries divided between northern and southern states. Non-Han peoples ruled parts of the north, Chinese elites migrated south, cultures mixed, Buddhism spread deeper into daily life. And even when non-Han rulers controlled parts of China, they often adopted Chinese-style administration because conquering land and governing land are very different skills. That could have been the permanent end of unified China. It was not. The Sui dynasty reunified China in 589 CE and almost immediately repeated the Qin mistake. Huge forced labor projects, including the Grand Canal, plus costly military campaigns. The state pushed too hard. The people broke. Sui collapsed within decades. Rise. Peak. Collapse. The Tang rose in 618 and became one of the great high points of Chinese history, a cosmopolitan empire connected by the Silk Road to Central Asia, Persia, and the Islamic world. Chang'an became a bright, crowded crossroads of camels, monks, dancers, merchants, poets, and confused travelers. Visitor, where is the main market? Local. Which one? Visitor. The main one. Local. That is adorable! But powerful empires create powerful frontier generals, and powerful frontier generals eventually remember they have armies. In 755, Anlushan rebelled against the Tang and devastated the dynasty. Tang survived, but it never fully recovered. The court remained, the rituals remained, but the bones underneath were cracked. Tang fell. China fractured again. The Song dynasty rose in 960, and Song is strange, militarily vulnerable, often forced to pay or compromise with northern rivals, but economically and technologically extraordinary. Gunpowder weapons, the compass, paper money, thriving cities, a massive merchant economy. A Song scholar official composes poetry while merchants behind him invent an absurd number of new financial instruments. Official, we are a refined civilization. Merchant, absolutely. I have also invented 17 new ways to make money and one new form of financial anxiety. Rise, peak, crack, rise again. Collapse is not the opposite of greatness in this story. Collapse is what greatness does right before it happens again. Then, in the 13th century, something arrived that the old system had never faced like this before. The Mongols. Under Genghis Khan and later Kublai Khan, the Mongols crushed northern China and then the Song through decades of war, completing the conquest in 1279. This was outside invasion. But Kublai Khan did not simply burn the Chinese imperial system down and rule from a tent. He adopted Chinese imperial forms, governed from a Chinese-style capital, and declared a new dynasty, the Yuan. He used Chinese administrative structures while also preserving Mongol identity and a clear ethnic hierarchy at the top. Picture a Mongol conqueror entering the palace with a bow, still smelling like horse and battlefield, only to be politely buried under tax records, grain registers, court rituals, and paperwork. Khan, I conquered this entire territory. Official, wonderful, Your Majesty. Your first meeting about grain transport begins at dawn. Khan, I have horses. Official, we have forms for horses. This is one of China's strangest survival mechanisms. Absorption. Conquerors could win on the battlefield, but to rule the country, they often had to operate inside its system. The Yuan weakened through financial strain, factional struggle, and rebellion. By 1368, it was overthrown. Its replacement was founded by one of the most unlikely emperors in history. Zhu Yuanzhang, a famine survivor who lost much of his family, became a wandering Buddhist novice, joined rebel armies, and rose through raw survival instinct to found the Ming dynasty. That is not a resume. That is a thunderstorm wearing a crown. Because he came from the bottom, Hongwu distrusted officials intensely. He believed elites could crush ordinary people because he had seen it happen. So he built a highly centralized, harsh, surveillance-heavy state. His logic was blunt. I know what officials can do to people, so I will control the officials first. The Ming restored Han Chinese rule, rebuilt institutions, and later sponsored Admiral Zheng his huge voyages across the Indian Ocean. Ming treasure ships crossed seas decades before European ships rounded the southern tip of Africa. One voyage even brought back a giraffe from East Africa. A sailor looked at it and probably thought, this deer has a periscope. But the voyages ended. Priorities shifted toward frontier defense and internal control. The Great Wall became a defining symbol, and a wall is not only a sign of strength, it is also a giant architectural way of saying, we are extremely nervous. By the 1640s, climate stress, silver shortages, corruption, and peasant rebellion broke the Ming. In 1644, rebels entered Beijing. The last Ming emperor hanged himself. Then the Manchus swept in from the northeast and founded the Qing dynasty, repeating the Mongol pattern. Outsiders conquered China by force, then ruled through the imperial framework rather than simply erasing it. Two foreign conquests, centuries apart. Both times, conquerors had the power to replace the system. Both times, they became its newest operators. So if famine, rebellion, and even foreign conquest could not kill this pattern, what finally almost did? For the first time in roughly 2,000 years, the threat at China's door did not fit the old pattern. It was not a rebel claiming the mandate. It was not steppe horsemen who could eventually be absorbed. It was industrial foreign empires arriving with steamships, cannons, and a drug they were very determined to sell. By the 1800s, the Qing dynasty was already strained by population growth, land pressure, and corruption. Then, British merchants pushed opium into Chinese markets on a massive scale. When the Qing tried to stop the trade, Britain responded with war. The Opium Wars humiliated China militarily and diplomatically. Treaties forced open ports, gave foreigners legal privileges on Chinese soil, and ceded Hong Kong to Britain. This was not only a military defeat, it was psychological. For centuries, Chinese imperial ideology had placed the emperor at the center of order. Now, foreign powers were carving exceptions into Chinese sovereignty, port by port. An elderly Qing official could hold a brush, a scroll, and 2,000 years of civilization. A steamship could hold cannons. Official, we have civilization. Steamship, I have range. Inside the country, suffering compounded: population pressure, land hunger, floods, corruption, opium addiction, and local violence. Then came the Taiping Rebellion, one of the deadliest civil wars in human history. Its leader, Qin Shi Huang, a failed civil service candidate, came to believe he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ. That sounds absurd. It was also catastrophically real. The Taiping built a rebel state, captured Nanjing, and threatened to topple the Qing. Death toll estimates vary, but most historians place it at roughly 20 million people or more. Do not imagine this as a funny map explosion. Imagine a mother walking away from a burned village with a child on her back. Imagine a farmer staring at a field nobody is left to harvest. Imagine smoke rising behind a city wall. Because when a dynasty weakens, history does not fall on an abstraction called China. It falls on people. The Qing survived the Taiping, but survival is not recovery. The dynasty was still standing. The floor underneath it was gone. Reformers tried the self-strengthening movement, importing Western military technology while preserving the imperial order underneath. But cannons are not just metal tubes. Behind them are factories, finance, science, education, and industry. In 1895, Qing China was decisively defeated by Japan, a country Chinese elites had long seen as culturally junior, but which had modernized much faster. Official, we lost to who? Assistant, Japan. Official, the island students? Assistant, they did the homework. Then came the Boxer Uprising in 1900 and foreign armies occupying Beijing. By now, the old explanation was hard to avoid. If the dynasty could not stop invasion, rebellion, or reform failure, maybe heaven had left again. But this time, the replacement would not be another dynasty. In 1911, revolution broke out. In February 1912, a document was signed in the name of the reigning emperor, a 6-year-old boy named Puyi, too young to understand what abdication meant. With that signature, more than 2,000 years of imperial rule officially ended. No more emperor. No more official mandate of heaven. No throne left to lose it from. The cycle should have stopped. It did not. Because removing the emperor did not remove the fear beneath the system. Chaos. The new Republic of China was born into warlordism, weakness, and fragmentation. Regional military leaders carved up the country, each claiming legitimacy, each collecting taxes by force. Warlord 1. I represent China. Warlord 2. No, I represent China. Peasant. Which China is taking my grain this week? Both warlords. Yes. Out of this chaos came the next struggle over China's future. Nationalists, communists, regional warlords, foreign powers, all trying to answer the same ancient question. Who can end the chaos? In 1937, Japan launched a full invasion. Cities were bombed. Massacres were committed. Millions of civilians died. A child hid during an air raid. A family fled with one bundle of belongings. A soldier stood in a ruined street, not as a symbol, just a person who was exhausted, hungry, and far from home. After Japan's defeat in 1945, China's unfinished civil war resumed. By 1949, the Chinese Communist Party under Mao Zedong founded the People's Republic of China on the mainland, while the defeated nationalist government retreated to Taiwan. The emperor was gone. The religious language of the mandate was gone. But one thing remained: a centralized authority claiming the right to govern a unified China after the old order failed. The shape survived the belief system that created it. What followed was not a clean, happy ending. The fear of chaos, taken to extremes, produced disasters of its own. The Great Leap Forward led to devastating famine. The Cultural Revolution unleashed years of political violence and social upheaval. The oldest pattern returned in modern form. The fear of chaos can build a system powerful enough to manufacture chaos again. After Mao's death, China pivoted toward reform and opening. Over the following decades, hundreds of millions were lifted out of extreme poverty, and the country became a global manufacturing power. The map changed again. No horse arrows, no rebel flames. Ports, grains, highways, megacities. But underneath the skyline, the same old fear remained: do not break apart again. Now go back to Puyi. He did not vanish after 1912. He was expelled from his own palace at 17. In the 1930s, Japan installed him as a puppet emperor in occupied Manchuria, proof that even people trying to dismantle Chinese sovereignty found the shape of a Chinese emperor useful. He was captured by Soviet forces in 1945, returned to China, imprisoned and re-educated, and in his final years, the man once called the Son of Heaven worked as an ordinary gardener in Beijing. If you wrote that as fiction, an editor would tell you to tone it down. But his life is the answer to this whole video in miniature. His title died in 1912. The boy underneath it did not. And the country underneath the throne did not either. China was never one continuous government lasting 3,000 years. Governments died constantly. Emperors died, dynasties died, capitals burned, armies collapsed. What survived underneath was a shared written tradition, a bureaucratic machine so rooted that conquerors often chose to operate it rather than destroy it, and one very old fear: when the center breaks, ordinary people pay first. That fear built unity. Unity built tools to fight chaos. And those tools, taxation, forced labor, surveillance, central control, kept becoming powerful enough to create a new kind of chaos. Go back one last time to the buried army outside Xi'an. Thousands of clay soldiers stood in the dark for 2,000 years, built by a man so afraid of losing control that even death was not allowed to end his rule. Those soldiers were not only guarding one dead emperor, they were guarding the first version of China's oldest answer to its oldest fear. If chaos can destroy everything, build an order strong enough to outlive death itself. That strategy worked again and again for 3,000 years. It also became the next disaster, again and again. That contradiction, order saving people from chaos, and order becoming its own chaos, is the real shape of Chinese history. Not une dynastie, not one emperor, a pattern, broken and rebuilt more times than almost any civilization on Earth. Still running today. Empires fall. Emperors get demoted to gardeners. And the thing built to outlive both of them keeps doing exactly that. That is 3,000 years. And it is still counting.